Welcome to Day 64 on the Trail. We have 4 readings today from Acts chapter 13, verses 13 through 52, Exodus 36, verse 8 through 37, verse 9, Proverbs chapter 1, verses 1 through 33, and the Wisdom of Solomon chapter 15, verses 1 through 19. In Acts 13, we find Paul's first missionary journey. I should also note that it is at this point, as Paul and Barnabas begin their mission to the Gentiles, that Luke shifts from using Saul to his Roman name, Paul. Pisidian Antioch was in the heart of Asia Minor, in the region of Galatia. Galatian kings conquered Phrygia, but later allied themselves with Rome. In 25 BC, the last of the Galatian kings fell, and Augustus organized the area into a Roman province. When we read of Paul's missionary journeys, we often only pay attention to the destinations. However, the journey between those destinations was often difficult and treacherous. For example, Perga is almost at sea level. Therefore, to get to Pisidian Antioch, Paul and Barnabas had to go over the Tarsus mountain range, which reached 3,600 feet above sea level. Now, upon their arrival to Pisidian Antioch, Paul and Barnabas went to the synagogue, which was their typical practice. The chief official of the synagogue, who would preside over the affairs of the synagogue, asked if Paul and Barnabas wanted to say anything. And here we find Paul's first speech in Acts. Since Paul is delivering the message in a synagogue, he begins by tracing God's saving action on Israel's behalf, moving from the Exodus and the conquest of Canaan to the kingship of David. Paul then places Jesus in the Davidic line. In verse 26, we have a shift then to the death of Jesus in Jerusalem as the fulfillment of Scripture and God's promises. In this section, Paul cites Psalm 2:7, Isaiah 55:3, and Psalm 16:10, and in this way provides a strong connection between Jesus and the Jewish tradition. Now, implicit in Paul's message is the unexpected declaration that Jesus brings freedom from the Mosaic law. This point echoes a major theme in Paul's letters, including Galatians 3, Romans 3, and Romans 8. Paul then ends his speech with a prophetic warning drawn from Habakkuk 1:5. Around our home, you will find various pieces of decorative wood or stone that hold a wise saying or famous quote. I think my wife has placed these around the house strategically, as maybe subtle hints for me. I wouldn't blame her. I can often use the reminders. In similar fashion, a significant portion of the wisdom literature in the Bible is dedicated to relatively short, concise sayings. Now, generally, wisdom literature isn't very exciting. It is much easier to become engaged in a story or a parable. However, when we think of wisdom literature, I expect to have an aha moment, to glean some new insight that will be life-changing. So when I turn to Proverbs or Ecclesiastes, I expect discovery. Instead, my mind often responds with the routine, no kidding. I don't mean to sound disrespectful, but I often find the wisest sayings to oddly state the obvious. Or in some cases, they express basic truths that should be obvious. Perhaps wisdom literature, like my wife's signs, really are meant to be reminders, voices calling us back to the basics. We identify these wise sayings as meaningful or familiar precisely because they are part of our created identity. When you read or hear something that is profound, have you ever wondered why you think to yourself, that is pretty wise, I need to remember that? Why does it connect? How do you recognize it as something worth remembering? In some miraculous way, we seem to be hardwired by God to identify our original and most basic programming. However, over the course of our lives, we can let false narratives and corrupt data flood into our souls like a computer virus. Most of the time, these viruses appear to be relatively harmless and simply run in the background, undetected. But over time, Their sinister and corrupt programming begins to build up and infect our conscious thoughts. By the time they reveal themselves in erratic emotions or dangerous behaviors, it is often too late to prevent a system's crash. So, from time to time, we need a reset. We need to strip off the negative bias and unprincipled buildup and return to our core programming and identity. And I hope that our exploration of Proverbs will do just that. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, stay on the trail.